So, several months ago, I purchased a set of Russian police strobes, which included a power supply and two strobes, supposedly documentation and other mounting equipment as well. Eventually, I got them working. Along the way, things got a little dodgy. This is what came out of the box. There's no wiring harness, two strobes, a supply, and some paperwork that maybe someone else can read, but I didn't even bother putting into Google Translate. There's definitely a parts list so that you can order replacement parts. I don't know how you would ever do that. I don't even have a year on these. I'm guessing these were used for a pretty long period on Russian police vehicles. The schematic actually wasn't bad. It did leave me with some questions and concerns about how I might need to wire these. The wiring ended up being both not a problem as far as connections, but also the Achilles heel of the project, only because of my own oversight of something I had already discovered, which you will see as we progress. The plug actually does take normal spade connectors. I bet you there's a plug that goes to this, but it didn't come with it. The strobes themselves were fairly robust with a very large bulb, and they seem to be in decent shape. It looks like you're supposed to run your own wire in here and tie it down with with a little tie down there, and then the connections would be ground, trigger, and hot. Far left being trigger in, skip one, third one's trigger out, and the last one's hot. Again, that ended up biting me pretty hard during my troubleshooting process. I initially decided to test one of these with an American known working power supply. My choice of power supply was absolutely ridiculous in hindsight, but I didn't do that until after I had opened up the power supply, which had some pretty beefy capacitors, quite a few MOSFETs that were actually pretty well anchored to the heat fins, and a transformer that made sense as to what it was doing. I was able to notice that I was getting over 1,000 volts DC out of those capacitors, which is almost double what you would see out of conventional strobes. So anyway, I hooked these up to a Tomar Opticom preemption strobe and let her fly, and that didn't go well. So what followed was a series of dodgy attempts to troubleshoot, test, and get both beacons working. I had one working beacon that I might have wrecked and one that wasn't working at all. And finally, I came up with a solution for mounting a replacement bulb, which is shown here and you'll see later. Okay, I don't know if anybody saw the first time I messed with these, but these are your genuine Russian Soviet strobes. They came with a power supply, but oh my, was that something. We're not figuring that out. The first time I tested one on a power supply that might not have been the world's best idea. I used the Tomar 20-watt single head emitter, which, you know, is a preemption device, and it's gonna flash like hundreds of times a minute. So I'm thinking maybe we use this old wheel and aircraft supply, which is like 45-50 flashes per minute, and relies on a bulb that is a little bit more similar to what might be in here. So we're going to pop this bad boy open, and I'm going to wire it up again, and we're going to see if we can let the smoke out of another Russian strobe. Okay, so these are pretty substantial. This housing is actually glass. This inside's glass. The way this fellow works is you've got a big old beefy, I believe, trigger section back there. You've got your trigger. Looks like it goes through a smoothing capacitor, maybe. And then you got your high voltage power, which I don't know if you can tell, but it runs to the anode. And then you've got your ground, which is the frame, which is coming straight out of cathode. And your trigger wire is again coming out the back there and going up in. So I'm pretty confident I got this wired right. It worked last time until the smoke came out, and I don't know if it was I think I smoked the bulb, because I really don't think I smoked that trigger. I don't know what I smoked, but we're going to try it with the Whelen supply here. We'll see what we get. Well, what we got is we got the trigger firing, acting like the bulb's bad. So it's about what we expected. The bulb didn't look as good as the other one. I'm going to check a couple connections, and I'll be back with you. Okay, so we've got the good old 570 volts going to the hot side. We've got the standard, like 4 volts going to the trigger, which, whatever. And we got a solid ground right there. So at this point right now, what we got is a bad bulb. Everything is doing what it should be doing. So we got a bad bulb in this one. I'm going to pull the other one out and see what we can get it to do after having cooked it. Okay, you can see the other one that I smoked previously is actually looks a little nicer in condition. Let's see how she does. Oh, look at that. She is firing off like a champ. Maybe it just took a little bit less aggressive of a power supply to do her upright. But that is a thing of beauty right there. We got the Russian strobe just firing just like she should. I mean, who wouldn't pull over for a trip to the gulag from that right there? So we got one working. So one working is better than none working. Let's throw another bulb, as close as we can get to another bulb in the other one, and see if that is in fact the problem. Alright, so the plan of attack here is going to be, I'm just going to take this whole bulb out, and I'm going to wire in a triggerless known working bulb and see what we get. Okay, and by wire in, of course, I mean we're just going to use the trigger, and we're otherwise just going to go straight high voltage right to the new tube. We'll see what happens there. Stand back, I guess, right? Okay, not exactly what we wanted. Move some things around here. All right, we'll give this another go here. Yeah, I don't hear the sound of the trigger firing at all, so I'm going to try a couple other things, see if there may be some unnecessary components I'm bypassing or something. All right, we'll give this another go here. Oh, listen to that click. We're firing away. We just aren't popping the bulb. So either I got something not hooked up right with the other bulb, or the other bulb's bad. So we're going to keep playing around. Okay, we'll try this with the known working. Yeah, just a wind up, no pop on that trigger. We'll fool around a little bit more. Okay, now we got the wind up, we got the trigger fire, we just don't got no flash, and that means that bulb's bad. I don't know where I'm getting a bulb like that, and I don't know what's wrong with the ones I'm using to switch into it. I'm gonna do some more looking around for something to swap in there. Okay, on a scale of 1 to sketch, we're at sketch. Okay, still sketch. Yeah, we'll go again at that. Let's try some measurements. Oh, look at that. Lots of the voltages. That's good. That's good voltages. Same. Excellent. We getting any trigger voltages? Yeah, we're getting a little trigger voltage there. Okay. So the search for a bulb that's compatible maybe continues. Okay, so I don't know if you can see this level of sketch here, but I've got my aircraft power supply. It's hot is going to the hot of the beacon. I've jumped off of the hot lead to the bulb. I've jumped the trigger off the trigger into the bulb. All my grounds are grounded together because reasons, why not? And here is a Whelen linear strobe tube. And it is just strobe tubing away. So this beacon still works. This beacon works great. And so before I shock the ever-living crap out of myself, I'm going to shut this down and I'm going to go in search of a bulb. Okay, so we know we've got one good working bulb, trigger, everything good to go on the one. So I went ahead and just wired a standard amp connector to that. We're going to make that our working beacon. Over here, we definitely need a bulb, and I'm probably not finding one for any sort of reasonable price or whatever. So, long story short on that, that one's probably going to be a display piece. But let's get this one buttoned up, and we'll have our single working Eastern Bloc strobe. You know what? Before we button up, we're gonna just make sure nothing blows up. All right, we got a working strobe. I'll throw the dome on it, and we'll call this one good. So I like to try to learn things, and I think I learned that the internal volume of a strobe tube matters, and the power supply that's powering it obviously matters, which I already knew that, but I ignored it. So I've got one kaput strobe here. Actually just needs a bulb, I think. And I've got one working one that I'm going to be very careful as to what I hook it up to from now on. Certainly won't be the supply it came with, because that's just going to be a hard no. But regardless, we got one working, and it'll become part of my European collection. And here's where I made a huge mistake. I hooked the trigger up to the wrong side of the smoothing capacitor. Unfortunately, this would cause the light to work fine on standard American supplies, but completely fail on Russian ones, which lengthened my troubleshooting significantly. Okay, we're not going to pretend that this isn't all kinds of totally sketchy. But we've got a linear strobe tube in here now. Your mounts are definitely electrical tape. The contacts, however, are going to be real contacts from a 900 series linear strobe. I've got I believe a wheel and edge turbo strobe tube in there right now. I believe that should be a usable volume, not to blow up, but we'll see. That sounds and smells like success to me. If I can get those mounts a little less janky, then maybe we'll be on to something. Not exactly sure what just happened there. I'll have to troubleshoot that too. Alright, so our creation is going to go up against a Strobe 2 power supply. One that is set up to allow a single outlet. A little bit more forgiving supply. So if this tube is kind of on the way to going bad, it'll probably be a little bit more forgiving. See how we do. Looks like we got ourselves a linear Russian strobe. I've got to come up with something for those mounts. This is why I keep saying I need a 3D printer. But we'll clean this up a little, maybe button it up, and see if I don't want to leave it this way. So we have a working gigantic trigger and a otherwise pretty much just socket. But the working gigantic trigger is what intrigues me. I may get out the Russian power supply and see if I can't get that to work. That might be the next step here, is since we've ruined the bulb on this already, maybe I'm not afraid to ruin the power supply. We'll see how that goes. When it came time to use the actual supply, I did a pretty specific pinout on what everything was. It turns out it shares the high voltage power, the grounds, and has individual triggers. So I was able to turn that into a regular amp connector for each one. If you're looking at this, you can see one of the sets of pins is ganged together. That's the ground, so that you can put an earth ground in and use it to ground the strobe's high voltage. But looking at it, the triggers are the smaller wires, and each one had a trigger, but they shared the high voltage and the ground. I'm not sure if the wires were faded or if the colors just meant nothing, but at the end of the day, they weren't helpful color-wise. Okay, so we're hooked up to the old 12, let's say 14 volts, and we'll go ahead and power that on, and we'll just step away. And we are charging up and nothing's firing, which is better than charging up and exploding. So do a little troubleshooting here. Stand by. Alright, so we have disconnected the jury-rigged strobe here. My theory is that this thing is sensing that the bulb is a different size and burned out. So let's try it with just this one plugged in. And there we have it. And we seem to be working. So I'm going to go find another strobe that I don't mind sacrificing to the gods and plug that in and see what happens. Okay, so the strobe that I decided to plug in here is a Whalen Engineering Par 64, which has peeling on the inside and is not of much use to me. We'll see what it does with that. Okay, it doesn't like it. Interesting. All right, disconnected. So something in there is looking for a similar sized resistance, something. This can be run single strobe though, so I do now have a working Russian strobe. I would like to find a twin for it. We'll keep looking. So just to kind of show here, my altered Russian strobe and my Par 64, they are compatible on a US power supply. So the mystery continues. We're going to keep digging here. Keep digging. All right, we are in full do not try this at home mode. I've got the trigger. I got a longer flash tube here. I've got the trigger alligator clipped to the trigger on the tube there. I think that the tube's bigger, so let's see what it does. Nothing. Okay. So let's disconnect it. Like, thank God, right? So we got just the one strobe plugged in. We're still good. So let's meter our other outgoing connection while we've got our one good strobe running. We will put this meter into high voltage mode. Focus. High voltage mode. And sending the ground over to ground there where it belongs. And I'm going to just probe the outgoing power and trigger connections of the two different lights. Here's the non-functioning one. Here's the outgoing power. So we're getting plenty of outgoing power. Let's see what we're getting trigger-wise. Definitely hold that between your legs. That's a good idea. Okay, trigger-wise, we're getting a lot of voltage. Let's see if the other one's that way. The other one is, in fact, that way. Okay, so all things are equal. I'm going to switch the outputs and see if it works on the other one. Test our output theory. All right, so I've reversed our outputs here. Let's see what we get. Right, so it works. So the outputs are fine. So what we're needing to do is a matching issue here. We've got a matching issue. So I need to come up with something that this strobe power supply likes and doesn't see as a bulb fault, essentially, is where we're at. Okay, so a little something we've noticed here is our trigger voltage drops to 0 as soon as it detects a fault. So what is it measuring to detect that fault? That's what we want to find out. So let's see if we make fault go away. See if we can do that without shocking ourselves. Well, we didn't shock ourselves, but we dropped you. But fault go away. Fault go away. We now have normal voltage on trigger and supply on the empty one and the working one. So the question becomes, one, do I maybe have this wired wrong to run two strobes, which I really don't think I do. or are we in some sort of protection mode? So let's see if we can't bypass that protection mode. All right, so stroke of genius. What if we unplug the good one and plug in just the dodgy one? And doesn't like it. So maybe I have a problem with my dodgy one. I'm going to troubleshoot my dodgy one on its own. So troubleshooting the dodgy one. I've got the high voltage. Don't have the trigger voltage. So that's going to be a troubleshooting issue. And it was at that point he realized he had effed up royally and probably doubled the amount of time the project would ultimately take to complete. Such is the curse of the dodgy job. All right, so we made a little realization here that this dodgy one works on American power supplies, but doesn't work even by itself on the Russian one. And it might be because of these smoothing capacitors, which on the trigger, which I really didn't think were that big a deal. And I had bypassed them, which was probably, in retrospect, not the thing to do. So let's plug in both of our strobes and see what happens with our triggers through our smoothing capacitor. Oh, look at that. Look at that go. Look at that dodgy high voltage. Sounds like it's going to explode. Fun. So you're going to hear a little arcing now and then. That's because the trigger wire is held together with an alligator clamp. So that's pretty dodgy. But really, what the difference here was I don't really want to point this. Right here, you got a smoothing capacitor for the input of the trigger to the actual gigantic trigger. I believe those are the triggers. Not on the power supply, but no. Usually on like American products, they'd be this little black fella right there, and it's that giant black fella right there on the Russian side. So you need that. Whatever that is absorbing voltage wise is what's allowing this to function. So I'm happy with this. I'd like to find a way to maybe get a bulb into that other strobe beacon that isn't, about to explode, but proof of concept. Okay, so some strobe tubes come with the trigger coil transformer, which I've been calling trigger, in line with the bulb, in line with the trigger. On this Russian strobe, the trigger coil transformer is that fella, and he requires a smoothing capacitor ahead of him. So what I've been doing is I've been just cutting the coil or the trigger transformers off of bulbs to use them. All right, so to summarize, this bulb is what's in this beacon. It has anode, cathode, tube, trigger. The trigger coil is just gigantic, and it's in the beacon. Trying to find a strobe tube that I could remove the trigger coil off of with the same gas volume. We ended up with this linear wheel-in tube wired in here, with the alligator clamp holding the trigger on. Thank you. And running the trigger through these capacitors does matter. So with all that done, what you end up with is you do end up with a working system. what I found interesting was that this thing actually cared that it didn't have a bulb in one of them. It actually it'll run with none bulb in the one side, but it'll shut down if it senses the trigger's no good. So that was kind of interesting. So the search is going to continue for a similar sized bulb to this that will fit in this beacon so I can button it up. So we confirmed that these little fellows here, these are capacitors, and they're taking, in some manner, they're taking the trigger voltage, which is like 200 and something volts DC for trigger, and turning it into like a more reasonable 17 volts for the trigger. Still an awfully large trigger coil, but things are flashing, triple flash like they should over here, occasional flash over here after redoing some contacts, but this bulb's clearly failing. I'm going to be looking for some like obstruction light tower bulbs and whatnot to throw in here. But until then, this high voltage journey has come to an end. You can actually see on my power supply how it's skipping a beat on the bad one. But anyway, this will be a single head unit until I can figure something else out. But thanks for joining me on this confusing journey. Just check out that voltage fluctuation on the positive side of the tube, though. Pretty interesting. Anyway, thanks a lot. Hope you enjoyed this as much as I did making it. Sorry about the video quality, but I hope you get the idea. And thanks for watching. Okay, we may have found that bulb. No trigger, about the same tube size, is tolerating the trigger coil, and is flashing right along in time. Now I just gotta mount the sucker because right now I'm just using female strobe pins, which is going to shock the hell out of me again, which I did not get on camera, but I took about 900 volts at less than an eighth of an amp, probably right through there. It didn't feel good, so I'm gonna have to mount that bad boy. We're gonna work on that. I wish I had a 3D printer. Christmas ideas, people. 3D printer. Well, you know, like a scab that wouldn't heal, I couldn't quit picking at it, so I found a bulb, fashioned a mounting plate system out of some plastic dividers for our Whalen edge, and let's see what we got. Oh my goodness, I think that's the way it's supposed to work. We might have it going. Throw the dome on it and see how close they look. Homemade spade adapters turned into amp plugs, repurposed bulbs of various types, a high voltage trigger coil, all sorts of oddities in this particular product, but they've been overcome and I have a working set. I have a working set of Russian strobes.